team of McCarthy scholars gained rare access to Cormac McCarthy's personal library, and most of these books are making their way to the University of Tennessee, where the novelist once walked the halls. The dean of UT Libraries tells me getting to house his books is an honor and a remarkable opportunity.
The fact that Cormac and his family have their roots here, the fact that so many of his, especially his early works, are set here, and the fact that he attended the university here.
Stephen Smith, the dean of UT Libraries, will receive books from the man he says is one of the country's greatest artistic geniuses. Cormac McCarthy had a collection of upwards of 20,000 books ranging from quantum physics to cowboys and naked mole rats.
Every book he bought because he was interested in it, in the content.
McCarthy's brother, Dennis, alongside scholars with the Cormac McCarthy Society, worked to find a home for the plethora of books that filled his two-story house and storage lockers in both Santa Fe and El Paso.
Just the enormity of it and the sheer volume of it is surprising.
Stacy Peebles, the president of the Cormac McCarthy Society, says roughly 2,000 books in his library are annotated, with summarized arguments, links to other novels, or simply writing, "This isn't right."
I mean, this is a man who read absolutely voraciously, and as you say, in just about every possible subject, and feeding his imagination, in almost every possible way.
It was just really fascinating getting to hear, especially how many books are coming to UT, but also being split up between different schools. That was just very interesting. So
Cool. Very good.
of course. So to start off, could you just tell me a little bit about your role in this project and kind of where the process started and what sparked this for happening?
Well, as you guys probably know, Cormac McCarthy passed away in June of 2023. And there was speculation at the time about, what would happen to his house. And, there's always interest in the artifacts of any artist, but certainly for a writer, you're interested in the books. And no one had really ever known much about his reading. Except what he said in the very few interviews that he gave, and what's evident in the notes and manuscripts, and of course, the works themselves, right? And so there were questions about the library, but we weren't quite sure. Of course, that's also a question for the family, in the wake of one of their members' deaths, which is always really difficult to deal with. And so it was in March of 2024 that McCarthy's brother, Dennis, his younger brother, Dennis, was wondering about what to do with the books and reached out to me by email and said, well, do you have any ideas? There's really too many to stay in the house, which is our first clue that, oh, okay, this is a big, this is a big project. But I went to visit him and we looked at the books. They had almost all been consolidated into McCarthy's house at that point. He had books both in his house and in storage lockers, both in Santa Fe and El Paso. And so we did a rough count together, and we thought there might be 30,000 based on just a guess. And the family didn't really have a desire to say, have a library specialist come and basically live on site for a year and a half to try to catalog all these. But I knew that scholars and really anyone who's ever read McCarthy would be interested, not to say really compelled by what these books were. So I suggested to Dennis that we scholars could do it. I'm the current president of the Cormac McCarthy Society, which is a network of both academics and non-academics who appreciate and study his work. And I knew there were people I could call who would want to show up. Even without a salary, or things like that. And he was amenable, Dennis, as a very gracious person. And he said, sure. I think he was a little skeptical that we could get that done. And he was probably right to be, given how many books there were. But that was when it started. I talked to a colleague of mine, Brian Gemza, who also is close with McCarthy's family. And together we put together a plan to start to make a record of the books and just see what was there.
And I know you just mentioned a rough estimate of 30,000 books and everything was being moved to his house. So could you explain what you first saw when you walked in? Was anything organized? And just what it looked like. I read articles about that. It was a small little hallway and there was books piled up on like against the wall. So could you just describe that for me?
Well, there are just books everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. This is not a small house. It's 2 stories plus a full finished basement. And there were books just all the way through it. And this is how he lived, according to his family and everybody that knew him. And then when there were too many books piling up in the house, he might put them in a storage locker. At one point, his brother Dennis and Dennis's wife Judy moved some to storage lockers in Santa Fe. Um, so you kind of feel like you're just walking into the lived experience of a person who lived their life through books. And he very much did, right? Books and ideas and imagination, and it's just all around you. And not, at least our initial impression was, no, it's not organized, right? There's a book on, yeah, naked mole rats next to one on Cezanne, next to one on quantum physics, which was fascinating. We later determined that the books that he had in storage lockers in El Paso, he had organized. And so they were in boxes that were labeled by subject, and not all always meticulously organized, but for the most part, through his own organizational system. So we made notes of that. Obviously, we recorded that. But as for his house, his living space, it was just kind of everywhere.
And speaking about these books, you just mentioned that some were annotated, and in a way, getting access to his personal library was kind of a way to get to know him, who he was, because he was a very private person. So, have you come to find anything that was really shocking when it came to his annotations or certain books, or anything that was really surprising that led you to know something about him by the way that he treated his books?
Well, his annotations are indeed just fascinating. And he annotated approximately 10% of his library. It's actually more in the range of about 20,000 in total, 20,000 total books. So there's about 2,000 that have annotations of some kind. Some of that is minimal, but there are an awful lot that are really heavily annotated. Most often books in the sciences or in philosophy, books that make an argument. And he would write comments in the margin. He would summarize arguments or push back, right? And say, this is silly, or, this isn't right. And then he would make connections to other writers or other thinkers. He'd do call outs in the margins. And so everything was fascinating to us, but maybe our favorites were his sense of humor, right? When his sense of humor would come out in some of these, marginal comments, just saying things like "this is rich," or he would often call an author by their first name if he was disagreeing with them. So, come on, Dan, that kind of thing. And then seeing, he would also make notes to himself, turns of phrase or facts or idioms that maybe he wanted to keep in mind and then use later in his writing. So one of my favorites was a little piece of paper in a book on English grammar, of all things. And it was a little note that said hot toe MIDI, which, is kind of a Appalachian expression of surprise, right, or enthusiasm. And it shows up in his first novel, in The Orchard Keeper. It's used there. So that was really cool, just to see him, taking note of that, a phrase that maybe he had heard or was thinking of or read, and then just made a note of it and then did, in fact, use it in one of his later books.
I was gonna say, so you just mentioned his novel. So could you explain what are some of examples of how his reading has influenced his novels after going through these books? Have you found that there was any connection? I mean, he was reading every genre under the moon. So what have you seen as a connection when it came to him writing his novels?
Well, sort of everything, right? I mean, this is a man who read absolutely voraciously, and as you say, in just about every possible subject, and feeding his imagination, in almost every possible way. I think, at least for me, some of the most obvious connections were in books about math and science that he collected a little later in his life, because those are so much in evidence in his last two novels, The Passenger and Stella Maris, which are focused on a pair of siblings. One is a genius mathematician, and the other one knows math, but is also, very, very gifted in physics. And because of his association with the Santa Fe Institute, which happened a little later in his life, he became conversant at a very high level in those fields. His friends and colleagues have said, yeah, I mean, he wasn't a dilettante. He could really do this. He really did know the contemporary, the modern and contemporary history of math and science and what those developments were. So it's really fun to look at those books and to see the books that are making arguments that he then puts in the mouths of in different ways of those two characters in particular. Whether math has a sense of reality outside our own human existence, right? Is mathematics really something that's universal, or is it just another semiotic system like language, right? That was something he was very interested in people making arguments about. He would read, annotate very heavily, and then that's a distinct question, particularly in Stella Maris. And so that's really fun when you can see just the straight line from stuff that he was reading and testing out and engaging with, and then it becomes his fiction. It's not a one-to-one. It's never a one-to-one transference, right? But you can see how the ideas are feeding the stories that he writes.
And these annotations, this collection of books, how do you think that this is going to open up new possibilities for research, whether that's within your society or the schools that are receiving some of his books?
Well, again, I'm a little biased, but I think this is enormous. Of course, his manuscripts, his notes, and his drafts are already at the Whitliff collections at Texas State University. They have been there for some time, although they're just about to open a second trove that was acquired after his death. Their first opened in 2008, and it was really materials up to that point in his life. Although this second acquisition includes things from throughout his life, in addition, to those last years. And I think, and they're also going to be acquiring the annotated volumes. And I think those go hand in hand, obviously, when you're looking at his notes and drafts, then you can, if he makes a note about something that he's reading, you can then go and see, well, did he annotate that particular book, right? So you can see it from both sides, which is really cool. But then my plan is to publish the catalog as a searchable online database. And I'm working with the University of South Carolina Press to do that. That'll take a little while because it's a lot of data to go through. But then you can see, well, what else by this author did he read, right? How many copies of this one book did he have? Because he did sometimes have multiple copies, and sometimes he would annotate both of them, which is interesting. And then you can look and see, well, approximately when in his life might he have read this? So my hope is that that data as a collection can then be used both with the archive that's at the Whitliff collections already, and then also with the annotated volumes, right? So you can triangulate with these three quite different sources of information to really see how is he thinking? What kind of mind does he have? And again, you're never gonna, as I tell my students, right? You're never gonna prove something definitively, but it's a wonderful way. It's a wonderful additional way to add more dimensions to his creative process.
Do you think that the public and scholars and researchers gaining access to all this material is going to, I guess, change public perception of him in a way?
I don't think so. I think the perception of him has always been of someone of deep intellect and really broad curiosity. And you really can't pick up one of his books and read it without thinking, oh, yeah, this is a guy who's done his homework, right? I mean, you read something like Blood Meridian, which is just so impressive in, its valences of history and philosophy and mythology and all these other things. So in that sense, I don't think so. I do think, though, just the breadth and depth of everything will it is even to me is surprising. I mean, I was pretty well aware that it was there, but it's another thing to see it. And everybody that we've worked with, photographers, scholars, there's a filmmaker working with us. Everybody who's walked in has known what was coming, but has still been surprised to stand there and go, "Oh, wow! Look at all this stuff. Look at it just keeps going. You kind of think you've got a handle on it, and then you turn a corner and there's still more." Right? There was an entire bedroom filled with boxes of books. You couldn't even see to the bag. We called it the beast because we were a little nervous about tackling that one as we worked through yet all these stacks and boxes of books. And we were working and working and taking boxes down, and we finally took enough off the top that we could kind of see into the rest of the room. And one of us said, "Oh, there's a bathroom back there." We didn't even know that, you couldn't even tell that there was more house beyond just the books that you were seeing right from the doorway. So I think that just the enormity of it and the sheer volume of it is surprising.
How many other folks did you work with to catalog all of these books? And also, could you give a rough estimate of about how long it took you?
So we had a few teams. I can't remember the total number. It was not an extensive number because this does require. We figured out pretty quickly. It's really great if you've got scholars. Again, there's all kinds of people who would, of course, be very generous with their time and want to volunteer with this. But because we were working quickly, we didn't want to, have the family, wait on us for too long. You have to make a lot of decisions on the ground as things are happening. And so having McCarthy scholars there to know what they were looking at and seeing, oh, this is important, right? We need to do this with this particular item was really helpful. I guess my two ride or dies were Jonathan and Rick Elmore. They were mentioned in the Smithsonian piece. They're twin brothers. Rick is a philosophy professor, and John is an English professor. And they write together. They work together on McCarthy. And so between the two of us, I guess we were both there for about 5 sessions in Santa Fe. We're all professors, so we have day jobs. We couldn't go and park there for months at a time. But I guess we started in earnest in May of 2024, and then we cataloged the last book in May of 2025.
So about a year.
So
Wow.
just about a year. Now there was a little mop up to be done. There was and there's still, of course, ongoing work. But in terms of the actual cataloging, it was just about 1 year.
About where are you at when it comes to sending these books over? I mean, we're located in Knoxville right now. I'm just a little curious of what the process is looking like with those books coming to UT.
So the Whitliff collection is going to acquire first the annotated volumes. Those are, of course, perhaps the most valuable, right? And so they'll be first. The Santa Fe Institute is also taking a small number of books as a way of they're planning to build a library kind of in honor of McCarthy on one of their campuses. And so the University of Tennessee will, it depends on their own logistics, but they should be able to do that in the spring of 26.
And after I was speaking with Stephen with UT Libraries, he mentioned about different exhibits or events or programmings. Are you looking to have these events at the different schools, and how are you going to connect all of these different places that are going to be having a piece of his personal library?
Well, I'll talk about events in a second. I think the easiest way that they'll all be connected is through this database, this catalog. That's the only place that the library as a record will actually exist in one spot, right? And the library, even the physical artifacts, didn't exist in one place, right? They were briefly all the books were briefly brought together in his house for cataloging, right, from the storage lockers and other places, and then they'll be dispersed. So the catalog will be the central place to go to see everything, to search and see, okay, if I'm interested in this author, where were the books and now where are the books, right? Where were they held in McCarthy's life and now which institution has them? And hopefully, again, additional information about each volume. Um, so scholars who are interested in, again, looking at the annotated ones can go to the Whitliff, but UT is getting the lion's share of the books, somewhere in the neighborhood of 18,000. And so there's all kinds of things I think that they'll be able to do. They probably won't be able to, I'm sure Steve said this, they probably won't be able to put them all on display at once. That would take its own building. But there are antiquarian books, there are old books, there are really interesting esoteric books about the Southwest, because when he moved from Tennessee out to the West and spent time in Texas and Arizona, that was a region he didn't know as much about, right? That took research. How do people talk? What's the history here? What are some of the stories, right? Growing up in Tennessee, he absorbed all that, but when he moved west, he had to educate himself, and he did that largely again through talking to people, but also reading. And so there's some fantastic stuff that you're not going to find easily, right? Just looking around. Interesting, cowboy books and books on horses and Mexican history. So that kind of stuff, right? That would be a great exhibit. That could even be, an event, maybe, focused just on that. Um, there are so many art books. There are books that are beautiful in their own right. He wasn't too much of a collector in the sense that every book he bought because he was interested in it, in the content. So he didn't buy for value. Although there are certainly some very valuable books in his collection, he doesn't, he didn't buy a first edition of Wuthering Heights just because he wanted a first edition of Wuthering Heights, right? But he does have some 19th century books that are gorgeous and also pretty hard to find. Leather bindings, things like that. So they have those too, right? Or they will have those too. So I think I mean, what subject matter are you interested in? There's almost an opportunity for just about anything because of the breadth.
Now, Stacy, this is my last question for you. I'm curious about what was the most surprising thing that you found throughout this entire process?
Um, so my personal favorite, this is hard, by the way. This is a hard question. And I've answered this differently in different contexts, but I think actually my favorite might be a copy of James Joyce's Ulysses, and he had several, but there was one that I opened and it was annotated, right? And that's interesting because a lot of people see his novel Suttree, right, his great Knoxville novel, as being a kind of, Tennessee Knoxville version of Joyce's Ulysses, right? How Joyce treats Dublin, McCarthy is treating Knoxville in Suttree. And so I was like, oh, this is interesting. Let me look at these annotations. And I was looking at them and I was thinking, these are different than the other ones I've seen. And I realized I think this was a classroom copy. I think this must have been a copy that he read maybe in college. I wouldn't think high school, but I'm not sure. Um, his handwriting is a bit different, and the kinds of notes he's making are the kinds of notes a student makes. Oh, this is this theme, right? Or oh, this is what metempsychosis means, right? And he writes the definition. It's as if he's responding to a teacher. He's not, engaging with it in the same way that you can see him with a math book or a science book or a history book, right? And I thought, wow, this is amazing. um, and I have no idea when or what class he might have read that, but to see that and to kind of be blown away by why does this look different? Oh, this must be why this is different. This is a very young McCarthy, perhaps reading this maybe for the first time, and that was really exciting. That was a puzzle. Again, I showed it to my colleagues, right? What do you think of this? And said, oh, I bet that's the answer. So that was a pretty nice moment.
Did you think you were ever going to gain access to his personal library? Is this something that any of you ever thought?
No. Well, Dennis had first gotten in touch with me because he saw an interview that I did, and I would ask the question about his library, and I said, well, I certainly hope that it's preserved in some fashion, but of course that's the family's decision. Um, and you just don't know, right? Again, it's a house full of books. It's a lot to deal with. So I never would have guessed that I'd get the chance to, yeah, to walk in the middle of it. And then, the project would go along as well as it did. When we were just starting, I told the team, look, anything we get is something we didn't know before. So if this blows up, or if somebody changes their mind, that's fine. But let's get what we can get, right? And then we'll have that. And so the fact that we did get to catalog that very last book was very gratifying. It was not at all certain when we started that that would be the case.
That was probably the greatest feeling. A year later,
I was pretty
cataloging that.
tired, but yes.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, books are heavy too, I should mention. The
That was
boxes are
probably
pretty
very
heavy.
tolling. Do you have any questions?
Stacy, just a couple questions, and thank you for
Yeah.
your time. It's been a blast listening to you speak. I'm just curious, as you guys were working through the house and sorting the books and what have you, Did you ever get a sense that there were some areas he was exploring maybe for a future or in the works book that he didn't get to finish?
That's a hard question to answer simply because again, there are just so many subjects, right, in the library as a whole. I guess my answer would be no. But that would be something that you could put against the manuscript materials, which I have not yet seen. I think they open in just a couple of weeks over in the Whitliff and San Marcos, Texas. Um, I know that there are some works in that collection from earlier in his life that he chose not to publish, short stories, things like that. Um, but no, I just from looking at the library, I don't think so. But again, I might be proven wrong. But my sense was that a lot of the stuff he was buying in his very later years were those math and science books, and those were largely, being taken up in the final two novels.
Was John still living in the house while you guys were working?
Yes, he was very gracious. He would come downstairs and we'd chat with him. Yeah, actually, we became pretty good friends. He enjoyed, we'd celebrate. We'd drink coffee during the day, and then he'd come over and have bourbon with us at night. So it was great, actually. And then, of course, he's keeping some of the books as he absolutely should, and those are in the catalog. They're denoted with his name. So those won't be publicly available because they'll be his private copies, but we know what they are. They were books that did belong to his father and that, now he's keeping. But it's important to us that we know what those are too. And he was, again, gracious in allowing us to do that.
Did Cormac have his own books? Did he keep copies of his own books?
He did. Those are not currently in the catalog, although we hope to add them. He did have an astonishing number of his own first editions, enough that it's a little strange. I don't think anybody knows quite why that is, but the person who was appraising the estate was going through those, working alongside us really, and looking at all those editions. That's probably the reason that when Dennis and I thought originally that there were 30,000, that number was high because there were also boxes of magazines and then there were boxes of his own first editions, just kind of all of a piece, right? All in the same space. Um, so yeah, there's quite a few of those. I think just about every novel. He also had, translations of his work, because his publisher would send him, when it's translated into Hungarian, right, or whatever it is. And I don't think he cared much about that. But people who do bibliographic work on translations of McCarthy, in fact, some of that might be relevant. It's quite hard to track down translations, right? Even if you're in contact with the publisher. So we're cataloging that as well to try to get a sense of the entirety of the translations of his work. So there's just a lot there. It is itself a rich text, I suppose.
Had you ever been in the house while he was alive?
No, no, not at all. No, I wasn't. I knew Dennis, but was not, a friend of the family during that time.
Yeah,
McCarthy was happy to keep the scholars over here, and I'm happy not to. I was happy not to bother him.
I think I indicated to you. I mean, we here in Knoxville obviously were keenly interested in him and wanted to look for, we always asked if we could do an interview. That was never ever going to happen. We would ask
Right.
Dennis, we would ask Judy. We tried every trick in the book you could think of. That just wasn't going to happen, even though he would be
Mm,
back here sometimes. So I
mm.
kind of wondered if you all had ever had a chance to go to his house or communicate or what have you with him. Um,
No, I mean, again, he had lots of friends, and was a, again, friendly, open person. But I always appreciated that about him. I don't necessarily want to be friends with an artist that I work on, right? Um, it would be an honor to, and I did meet him once many years ago, but I always appreciated that. If you work on somebody like Flannery O'Connor,
yes.
O'Connor, tells you what she's doing, right? This is what I'm writing about. I'm interested in this idea of grace, right? And as a scholar, if you want to address her through a different lens, you first have to tap dance around her own statements. And that's not great. That's not easy. I don't, I am, wholly in the camp of, an artist makes a work of art and puts it in the world, and then it belongs to those who read it or view it or watch it or whatever in the way that they want to. right? Everybody should be free to appreciate art in the way that they desire, or are interested in. And McCarthy was never going to tell you what to do with his stuff. So I always actually appreciated that. I appreciated that distance. And I'm not sure, again, I don't know if you could have the kind of career he had now, right? No social media, right? No branding, none of that. Just the work, really just the work. So yeah, I think sometimes his refusals to talk to people or to show up and speak could come off perhaps coldly, but I don't think that's how they were intended at all. I think it was, he said in a letter once, you got to protect your creativity, and this is one of the ways that it's really important to do so.
I just have two questions, and they're kind of related. The Smithsonian piece mentioned that he was um, in a room off the hallway when he passed, and so I would imagine you guys were in that room as well. I'm just wondering what that room was, and then secondly, and really more important, did you feel his presence while you were in the house? Did you get the sense of, okay, he's here with us now, or you could just sense the man?
Well, as to your first question, I'm not sure. I like to think that that's the room that was then full of boxes of books. Again, I guess I didn't explicitly ask that question, but that would be appropriate to me. If that's this, his spirit was left there, being an absolute beast box, room full of boxes of books, right? That seems good. Um, yeah, I don't think you can be in an artist's house. Somebody who worked in their house, he wrote in his house, right? He didn't have a separate. I mean, he did write in hotel rooms at different parts of his life, I should clarify, but he didn't have a separate artist studio. And so I don't think you can be in the space of a person who gave themselves their entire life so wholly to their art form and be around the physical artifacts of that art, right? He is a writer. He read lots of books and he wrote great books, right? I don't think you can exist in that and not feel reverence for that, right? And not feel like, yeah, this is the aura of an artist, right? In these artifacts.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. I guess you've probably been to Knoxville since you are a Cormac scholar.
Oh yeah, and in fact, our next Cormac McCarthy conference will be in fall of 26. Back in Knoxville, we were there. We typically have them every 2 years, and we were there in 24. So that'll actually be great. I've been talking to Steve about it since hopefully we can coordinate some stuff since they will have the books. I'm sure they will not have cataloged, accessioned them by that point. There's a lot that takes a long time, but certainly we could do, some kind of exhibit or put together some kind of something to go along with the conference, right? That people could see something of what this collection is going to look like. So that'll be pretty cool. But yeah, I love Knoxville. I was there actually with the Smithsonian writer Richard Grant. We came and met Wes Morgan, longtime Knoxvillian, right? So that he could show Richard some of the Cormac sites around the area. Bill Hardwig, who teaches at the university, is also a close friend, and he was hanging out with us too. So that was a lot of fun.
It's a real shame about, oh, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, the McCarthy home burned, which I'm sure you know, in
Right,
a town
right.
called South Knoxville. It hadn't been well cared for, but nevertheless, to have that thing go up in a fire was a real, real shame.
Yeah, it really was. No, I think Knoxville has more openly embraced him in recent years, with a few more like monuments, right, and a little more public acknowledgement from the university and otherwise, and that's been good to see. I think there was a long period where he wasn't much claimed by the city, but he should be, right? That should be sort of one of the artistic highlights, right, or draws of the town. So I like that. I think that's, and I think yeah, I think the bulk of the library going to the university is a great thing for that.
Cataloging McCarthy's books took nearly a year to complete, and UT should receive about 18,000 of his books in spring of 2026. There are plans to publish an online searchable database where you'll be able to see what McCarthy read, how many copies he had, approximately when he read them, and other books he pursued by a specific author. The next Cormac McCarthy Society conference will take place in fall of 2026 right here in Knoxville.